When you stop texting first, something fascinating, and often deeply unsettling, begins to happen. The dynamic shifts, the illusions dissolve. Suddenly, you're not just observing the relationship, you're observing the truth behind the relationship. And that truth, if you're willing to face it, has the power to wake you up from a psychological sleep you may have been in for far too long. We live in a culture obsessed with staying connected. We text, we check in, we maintain. But most people don't realize that relentless connection isn't always a sign of health. Sometimes it's a sign of fear, a fear of abandonment, a fear of being forgotten, a fear that if you don't keep the lines of communication open, no one will. And so you become the glue, the initiator, the one who always sends the hey, the how are you, the thinking of you. But here's the problem, that level of one-sided initiation erodes your dignity over time. It teaches you to suppress your own worth in order to preserve a connection that might not even be real, and it teaches the other person that your attention is automatic, that they don't have to earn it, reciprocate it, or value it. They just have to wait, and you'll come to them. This is especially true when you're dealing with individuals who exhibit narcissistic tendencies. They thrive on asymmetrical effort. They want you to chase. They want your emotional investment to be higher than theirs, because that imbalance gives them power, it gives them control, and they interpret your eagerness not as loyalty, but as weakness. So when you stop texting first, what you're really doing is disrupting the balance of power. You're taking a step back and saying, let's see if you're actually here with me, or if I've just been dragging a ghost through my phone. And that is when the real story begins to emerge. Some people will go silent. They'll vanish, and at first that may feel like rejection, but in reality it's revelation. They didn't disappear because you withdrew. They disappeared because they were never truly invested in the first place. Your pursuit kept the illusion alive. Your energy was the scaffolding. Once it was removed, the structure collapsed. That's not abandonment, that's clarity. Other people will get angry. They'll accuse you of being distant, cold, or manipulative. Why? Because silence is a mirror, and mirrors are uncomfortable for people who depend on distortion. Your decision to stop initiating contact forces them to confront a reality they've been avoiding, that relationships require mutual effort and that they may not be willing or able to give it. And then, rarely but beautifully, there are those who respond with sincerity. They notice the silence, they reach out, they reflect, they ask how you are. These are the people who aren't just in relationship with your availability, they're in relationship with you. They don't need to be chased, they come toward you when the space opens. That's what real connection looks like, but let's be honest, most people never get to see these distinctions because they're too afraid to stop chasing. The silence scares them, they equate stillness with loss, but in truth, silence is diagnostic. It separates illusion from reality. It shows you who's truly present and who's only there when you're working to keep them there. From a psychological perspective, this shift is transformative. It moves you from codependency to autonomy. It breaks the cycle of people pleasing and forces you to confront your own fear of being alone. Because sometimes we chase people not out of love, but out of a desperate need to not feel abandoned. And when that fear runs your relational life, you will always be a hostage, chained to the hope that someone else will validate your existence. That's no way to live. If your existence depends on another person responding to a text, you've already surrendered too much of your power. You've outsourced your sense of value to someone else's momentary attention span. And make no mistake, that's a dangerous place to be, so stop, step back, watch, and let the silence do what only silence can do. It will speak volumes if you're brave enough to listen. The people who care will show you. The people who don't will show you too, and while the truth may hurt at first, it will heal you in time, because you will no longer be pouring your energy into people who only love the chase, not the connection. You don't exist to prove your worth. You don't exist to perform emotional labor just to be seen. The right people will recognize your value in the quiet. They won't need to be chased. They will meet you in the middle, or they'll let you go. Either way, you win, because what you gain in return is your dignity, your clarity, and your peace. Let the silence reveal what words have been hiding. Watch what they do. That's where the truth lies. There's a destructive lie many people carry, especially those who have been emotionally entangled with manipulative personalities. The belief that it's their job to hold everything together, that if they don't reach out first, communicate often, and maintain emotional closeness, the relationship will fall apart, and that its failure would somehow be their fault. It's a form of self-abandonment that masquerades as responsibility. And make no mistake, it is not compassion, it is not kindness, it's psychological captivity. There's a difference between biblical love and compulsive effort. Love involves mutual sacrifice, it gives, but it also receives. Effort, on the other hand, can be one-sided, and when it becomes your default posture in relationships, when you're the one always initiating, always checking in, always fixing, always proving, it's no longer an act of love. It's an act of survival, and here's the brutal truth that most people don't want to confront. Sometimes the reason you're texting first, again and again, is not because you love the person, it's because you're terrified of what their silence would mean. You've equated their response with your worth. You've mistaken their attention for safety. But when your sense of security is so fragile that it depends on another person's validation, you're not in a relationship. You're in a psychological transaction where your soul is the currency. You cannot mistake self-abandonment for obedience. That's a confusion rooted in trauma, not truth. Many people raised in emotionally unstable or neglectful environments learned early on that love must be earned, that affection is conditional, and that silence equals danger. So they learned to overfunction. They became the ones who reached out first, apologized first, explained themselves even when they did nothing wrong, and chased after crumbs of reassurance. And the pattern followed them into adulthood, into friendships, marriages, ministries. And if you've ever been caught in this loop, you know it's exhausting. You end up living in a chronic state of emotional overextension, constantly monitoring other people's responses while ignoring your own boundaries and emotional needs. This is where the spiritual component matters, because when you don't know who you are in Christ, you will try to earn your value through human approval, and you will spiritualize your exhaustion. You'll tell yourself, "It's my calling to keep this together. I'm being faithful." This is what love looks like. No, that's not what love looks like. That's what burnout looks like. That's what bondage looks like. That's the fruit of confusion, not clarity. You were not created to be a peacekeeper at the expense of your own peace. You were not called to be Christ for other people while crucifying your own soul. The gospel does not demand self-erasure. It demands surrender to truth, to integrity, to discernment. And if the people in your life require you to keep abandoning yourself just to remain in good standing with them, then what they love is not you. What they love is their ability to control the version of you that serves their comfort. Let that sink in, because until you recognize it, you'll keep texting first. You'll keep initiating, you'll keep trying to be the one who holds things together, and you'll never stop long enough to ask the essential question, why am I doing this? What am I afraid will happen if I stop trying to prove I'm worthy of connection? There's deep psychological work required here. It's not just a matter of saying, I'll stop texting. That's behavior modification. What we're talking about is transformation, a complete reordering of how you see yourself in relation to others. And that begins when you understand that love in its healthiest form is not coerced. It's not maintained through guilt, pressure, or performance. Love must be free to choose. It must be mutual. Otherwise, it is not love. It's emotional labor. And here's the test. Stop texting first, not as a game, not as a punishment, but as a way of seeing clearly. Watch what happens when you pull your energy back. Who notices, who reaches out, who responds with care, and who responds with confusion or entitlement. That reaction will teach you more than months of overthinking ever could. You'll begin to see who has been depending on your effort to keep the illusion of closeness alive. You'll see who has a heart for you, and who merely had access to your presence. That distinction is life-changing. Spiritually, this is also about lordship. When you stop overfunctioning, you're declaring, consciously or not, that God is in control. You're no longer trying to manipulate outcomes. You're trusting that truth, when allowed to speak, will divide rightly, that it will expose the counterfeit and preserve what is real. That's faith, that's maturity, that's love rooted in truth. So stop confusing your relentless effort with faithfulness. Obedience is not about exhaustion. It's about alignment, and sometimes the most obedient thing you can do is to stop reaching out first and allow what is true to emerge on its own. Because the person who does not pursue you when you stop pursuing them was never walking with you. They were being carried, let go, and let truth do what striving never could. One of the most psychologically revealing things you can do in a relational dynamic, especially with narcissists or emotionally manipulative individuals, is to stop being predictable. And the easiest way to become unpredictable is to stop texting first. That might sound trivial on the surface, but it's not. It's actually a deeply strategic and deeply symbolic act, because for narcissists, control is everything. And that control often hinges on your predictability, your availability, and your willingness to chase after breadcrumbs of affection they strategically ration out. Narcissists crave the chase, not the connection. It's critical to understand this. They don't value intimacy in the way emotionally healthy people do. What they value is the feeling of being desired, pursued, and needed. They feed on the emotional energy of others. It affirms their fragile sense of superiority and masks the hollowness within. And so long as you continue to reach out, to initiate, to explain yourself, to beg for clarity or closure or reciprocity, you are feeding that ego. You're sustaining the illusion that they are worthy of being pursued. But the moment you step out of that pattern, when you stop initiating contact, you throw their internal equilibrium into chaos, because you're no longer affirming the script they've built around themselves. You're no longer confirming their distorted belief that they're the center of gravity in every relationship, and that's when the mask starts to slip. You see, narcissists wear social masks, crafted identities designed to elicit admiration and dependence. These masks are upheld by two things: image management and relational control. They present themselves as ideal, charming, intelligent, deeply interesting, but only as long as they're being mirrored by others. Once the mirroring stops, once you stop feeding the persona, their true self begins to emerge, and that self is often petty, reactive, entitled, and emotionally immature. When you stop texting first, you remove yourself from the role of mirror. You're no longer reflecting back their carefully curated image. You're no longer saying, "Yes, you're important enough for me to chase," and that is terrifying to a narcissist, because their sense of self is entirely dependent on how others respond to them. Without constant reinforcement, the illusion collapses, and here's what you need to be prepared for. Their response will not be mature, it won't be thoughtful, it will likely swing between two extremes, rage and silence. Some narcissists will lash out, accusing you of being distant, cold, ungrateful, or cruel. They'll play the victim, distort the narrative, and try to guilt you back into the chase. Others will simply vanish, ghosting you without explanation. Both reactions are power plays. Both are attempts to regain dominance, and neither has anything to do with genuine care for you. But that's exactly why your silence is so powerful. It creates space for truth to reveal itself. Not just their truth, but yours. Because when you stop chasing, you're also confronting your own inner wounds. You're standing face with the part of you that believes you must work for love, that you must earn attention, that you must perform to be seen. And if you're willing to stay in that uncomfortable place, not escape it, not text again, not apologize just to restore contact, you will begin to see that your worth never depended on their response. This is where true psychological liberation begins. Because once you see that your emotional labor was sustaining an illusion, not a real connection, you can stop blaming yourself for the disintegration of the relationship. You can begin to grieve what was real, your effort, your sincerity, your vulnerability, and release what was false. You can start to build relationships on the foundation of mutuality, not manipulation. It's also important to say this. the pull to return to old patterns will be strong, especially if you've internalized the idea that your value lies in how well you care for others. Narcissists exploit this. They count on your empathy, your guilt, your fear of abandonment. But empathy without boundaries is self-destruction, and guilt is not proof of wrongdoing. It's often just the residue of conditioning. So what do you do instead of texting first? You wait and you watch, not passively, not bitterly, but intentionally. You let the silence reveal who people truly are when they're not being pursued. Some will surprise you in good ways. Others will reveal exactly what you were too afraid to see. But either way, you gain something invaluable, clarity, and with clarity comes strength. The strength to stop managing other people's egos. The strength to walk away from connections built on imbalance. The strength to be alone, not out of fear or bitterness, but out of reverence for truth. That is a strength most people never develop because they're too busy trying to maintain peace by surrendering themselves. But when you develop that strength, when you learn to let the narcissist's ego starve instead of feeding it with your attention, you break a cycle that could have enslaved you for the rest of your life. And here's the final truth. The person who needs you to chase them in order to stay connected to you was never trying to walk with you. They were trying to stay ahead of you. Let them run. You don't belong behind them. You belong in relationships where love meets you halfway. The moment you stop texting first, you introduce a powerful shift, not just in the dynamic between you and the other person, but within yourself. It forces an uncomfortable but necessary confrontation. Was it ever mutual? That's the question most people don't want to ask because deep down they're afraid of the answer. But avoiding that question has a cost. It keeps you in cycles of one-sided emotional labor, where your value is determined by how much effort you're willing to pour into a connection that, in truth, may never have been built on reciprocity in the first place. Human beings have a deep psychological need to belong. That's not pathological. It's part of the structure of our being. But that same need becomes a liability when it's directed toward people who exploit it. And it's precisely in the ambiguity of inconsistent relationships that we lose ourselves. We confuse attention for affection and effort for love, and we begin to define our worth not by our character, but by whether or not someone responds to our message. But consider this, if a person only engages with you when you reach out, what does that say about their investment? What does that reveal about their character? Not their charm, not their charisma, not their potential, but their consistency, their effort, their will to connect. There's a reason it's so psychologically revealing to step back and let the other person move, because the absence of your pursuit exposes the truth of the relationship. And while that truth may be painful, it is not cruel. It is, in fact, merciful. It gives you the information you need to stop building castles on sand. Let's not sugarcoat it. Many of us have been emotionally programmed to overgive, especially those who have encountered narcissistic or emotionally avoidant individuals. You learn to interpret silence as a challenge. You interpret distance as a call to come closer, and instead of reading the lack of response as a boundary, or worse, as indifference, you assign it deeper meaning. You imagine they're hurting, struggling, unsure, needing grace. You create excuses for their emotional absence because the alternative, that they simply don't care enough, is too difficult to accept. But that interpretation is more about you than it is about them. It's about your fear of being unchosen. It's about the inner narrative that says, if I stop trying, I'll be alone. And that will prove that I'm not enough. So you overfunction, you reach out, you explain. You keep the emotional wheel turning, hoping that eventually they'll match your effort, but they never do, because they don't have to. You've made it easy for them not to. So when you finally stop texting first, it's not just a behavioral change. It's an existential recalibration. You're refusing to carry what was never meant to be yours. You're stepping out of the delusion that connection must be maintained at any cost, and you're allowing reality, undistorted, unfiltered reality, to have the final word. And here's what you find in that silence. Some people never cared, others cared, but not enough. Some liked the idea of you more than they liked you. Some enjoyed the control. Some liked knowing that you'd always come back, that they didn't have to try. Some just took you for granted, and all of that hurts. Of course it does. But it's truth, and truth, even when it stings, is the only thing that can set you free. You'll also find something else in that silence, something more important. You'll find out who you are when you're no longer performing for connection. That's where your true self begins to emerge, not the version of you that's endlessly accommodating, not the version that bends, molds, and sacrifices in order to avoid rejection, but the version of you that says, if it's not mutual, it's not love, and I will not carry the weight of a one-sided relationship any longer. This isn't about pride. It's not about playing games. It's about reclaiming your psychological sovereignty. It's about refusing to be emotionally manipulated by silence or inconsistency. It's about recognizing that love isn't proven by how much pain you're willing to endure for someone who won't even meet you halfway. And here's the uncomfortable but liberating truth. Some people will disappear when you stop texting first. Let them, because their silence is not your loss, it's your clarity. It's the absence of illusion. And in that space, you can finally begin to build connections based on truth, mutuality, and respect. Stop asking, why aren't they reaching out? Start asking, why am I trying so hard to keep something alive that dies without my constant effort? That question will change your life. It will draw a hard line between codependency and love, between hope and denial, between fantasy and fact. And you need that line. Because a life spent chasing people who never chase back is a life spent abandoning yourself. So let the silence speak. Let it test the relationship. Let it strip away the pretense. And if the only thing holding the connection together was your pursuit, then it wasn't a connection at all. It was captivity. Walk away and walk free when you stop initiating, when you finally stop texting first. You allow space for the other person to reveal their character without your interference. That's the test. It's not a manipulation, not a punishment, it's an observation. And it's one of the most psychologically potent things you can do in any relationship, because character is not revealed through words. It's revealed through choices, through patterns, through what someone does when they're no longer being carried by your emotional energy. You see, we live in a culture that's deeply obsessed with potential. We fall in love with people's projected selves, with the idea of who they could be if only they tried, if only they healed, if only they realized how much they're loved. That illusion is intoxicating, especially for people who have grown up earning love rather than receiving it freely. It gives them a project, a purpose, a justification for overgiving, and so they chase. They text first, they initiate every conversation, they excuse every red flag, all in the name of love. But what they're really doing is avoiding the truth, that the other person isn't choosing them. That's what we're often unwilling to confront, the reality that some people don't reciprocate, not because they're incapable, but because they don't want to. And when we're the ones always initiating, always keeping the communication alive, we block ourselves from seeing that reality. We distort it, we say they're busy, they're overwhelmed, they're not good at texting, they'll come around. We create narratives to avoid the ache of being unwanted, because to stop texting first, to step back and observe, is to risk seeing that it was never mutual to begin with. But you have to be brave enough to take that risk. You have to allow the silence to be uncomfortable. You have to let the chips fall where they may, because that's where real data lives. That's where you stop fantasizing about someone's potential and start witnessing their actual behavior. And behavior, consistent, voluntary behavior, is always the final arbiter of a person's character. Not what they say, not what they promised, not how they made you feel in the beginning, but what they do when there's nothing to gain from it. Now, here's where it gets philosophically interesting, because in order to observe someone's character clearly, you have to remove your own ego from the equation. That's not easy, because we're all tempted to believe that if someone doesn't respond, it must be because we weren't enough. That if we'd said the right thing, looked the right way, given a little more, they would have stayed. But that's an illusion rooted in emotional immaturity. Mature love isn't something you manipulate into existence. It's something that reveals itself over time through action and integrity. When you stop initiating, you're no longer performing for affection, you're no longer managing their emotions or trying to elicit a specific response. You're surrendering to what is, and what is in many cases is silence, indifference, absence. That's not a failure, it's feedback, it's evidence that you were the only one invested, and that knowledge, while painful, is the beginning of self-respect. We often want to believe that love is proven through effort, and there's some truth in that. Healthy relationships require intention, vulnerability, and perseverance. But effort has to go both ways. If it doesn't, it's not love. It's emotional servitude. And if you find yourself in a dynamic where all the effort is one-sided, you're not building a relationship, you're building a shrine to someone else's ego at the expense of your own soul. You deserve more than that. But you won't know that you deserve more until you see clearly what's actually happening. And that requires distance, stillness, observation. It requires the willingness to let people show you who they are when you're no longer fighting to keep their attention. Sometimes they rise to the occasion, sometimes they don't. Either way, you win, because you've escaped the illusion. You've exited the emotional theater. You've stopped trying to write a better story for someone who never showed up to play their part. So, what do you do while you wait? You stay grounded. You take care of yourself. You resist the urge to abandon just to feel connected. You remind yourself that your value doesn't diminish just because someone else failed to see it. You anchor yourself in reality, not fantasy, and you prepare to walk away from anything that asks you to shrink in order to stay. This is not cruelty, this is clarity, and clarity is kindness, to yourself first and then to others. Because when you stop rescuing people from the consequences of their own indifference, you give them the opportunity to grow, or to walk away, and either outcome is better than continuing to carry dead weight out of fear and loneliness. So let people reveal themselves, let silence speak, let actions preach louder than promises, and when you finally see what was always there beneath the noise, believe it, then choose yourself with the same energy you once used to chase them. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. When you stop texting first, and the connection fades into silence, it can feel like abandonment, but more often than not, it's exposure. It exposes the architecture of a relationship you were sustaining on your own. It unmasks the truth that your presence was the bridge, and without your steps there is no crossing. That kind of revelation doesn't just clarify who they are, it clarifies who you are, and more importantly, who you have been pretending to be in order to keep something broken from falling apart. Now, here's where we move deeper into the psychological core of the issue. One of the most painful realizations a person can face is that their fear of rejection has compelled them to remain in relational delusion. In psychological terms, this is the mechanism of self-deception. The mind distorts or omits information to protect the ego from pain, and one of the most common ways this manifests is in our tendency to cling to hope rather than reality, to choose emotional fantasy over sober truth. We create entire narratives around a person's silence. They're overwhelmed, they're struggling, they just need time, and in doing so we protect the illusion, not the self. This is not merely a relational issue, it's a moral one. Because the refusal to confront reality is a kind of dishonesty, and all dishonesty has consequences. When you lie to yourself long enough, you lose the ability to discern what's real, and that makes you vulnerable to manipulation, abandonment, and emotional abuse. You become complicit in your own diminishment, not because you are weak, but because you are unwilling to stand in the discomfort of truth. Let's be blunt about something. If a relationship collapses because you stop initiating contact, it was not a relationship. It was a performance, and you were the one keeping the stage lights on. When you finally let that performance end, you make room for something sacred, dignity. That's not just a nice word. It's the psychological foundation of healthy self-worth. Dignity is what allows you to walk away, not in bitterness but in clarity. It says, I see what you did, and what you didn't do, and I choose to stop bargaining for scraps of love. Now, this isn't about vengeance. It's not about trying to show them what they lost. That mindset is still externally oriented. It's still built around the need to be seen by someone who chose not to see you in the first place. What we're talking about here is a profound shift in orientation, from other validation to self-alignment. It's the recognition that you don't have to force anything that's meant for you. You don't have to chase, beg, or convince someone to value you. If they wanted to, they would. If they don't, they won't. And no amount of effort on your part can make up for their lack of initiative. There's a strange kind of grief that comes with this revelation. It's not just the loss of a person, it's the death of an identity you held while trying to keep that person in your life. You mourn the version of yourself that believed, hoped, and tried, and in letting that version go, something new emerges. A self that doesn't just want respect and reciprocity, but requires it. This process is not easy. It's a stripping away, a refinement, a psychological purification, and if you let it, it will change the kind of people you allow into your life. It will elevate your standards, not out of arrogance, but out of understanding. You'll begin to recognize that real love is not proved by persistence in the face of neglect. It is proved by mutual effort, mutual respect, mutual desire. Anything less is exploitation. The hard truth is this: some people were only in your life because you were convenient. You filled the silence. You made them feel important. You gave them emotional access without them earning it. And when you stopped giving, they disappeared, not because they were confused, but because they never intended to give back what you gave. You were a resource, not a relationship. Facing that truth will hurt, but it will also heal. Because once you see it, you stop internalizing other people's emotional poverty as your personal failure. You stop thinking, I wasn't good enough, and you start realizing they were never willing. That distinction frees you. It restores your energy, and it teaches you to stop building homes in people who were never planning to stay. This is where personal transformation begins, in the wake of what didn't work, in the space left by unanswered messages. In the silence that feels like rejection, but is actually revelation, so let it go quiet. Let the unanswered text remain unanswered. Let the lack of effort speak, and when it does, believe it. Because the most powerful decision you can make is to stop chasing people who are comfortable losing you. You're not hard to love. You were just giving love to someone who didn't know what to do with it. Let their silence be the end of that chapter, and let your self-respect be the beginning of a better one.